Hi, this is the Politics Show on France 24. Every week we look at the shifting landscape of French politics. This week, a major development in the presidency of François Hollande, the French military intervention in northern Mali. Friday, January 11th, French combat helicopters flew into northern Mali to stop the advance of Islamist fighters who control the north of the country. That includes the local branch of Al-Qaeda. France is now waging war in the Sahara Desert to rid Mali and the entire region of these groups. So how does this impact the Hollande presidency? Will it define his political future? My guests today, Michael Kirtley, independent filmmaker and journalist. He has about over 40 years experience reporting in the region. Michael, we'll be getting your insights shortly. We've also got Gabriella Parusini, journalist at Wall Street Journal. You cover the whole range of French affairs for the Journal. We've got Mark Dean on set, journalist at Bloomberg News. Also, the whole range of French affairs, business news to politics. We'll get your insights a little later on. And Philip Stoner has got the military goods for us, so to speak. He's former deputy defense attaché at the British Embassy in Paris. He also knows what it means to run a military operation in a political context. And let's start with this political context. Gabriella, how does this impact the Hollande presidency?
Well, so far, the Mali intervention seems to have had a very positive impact on the on Mr. Hollande's presidency, because Mr. Hollande, who's always been depicted as a much politician, has just gained the galleon of commander-in-chief. We've also seen public opinion rallying behind the president. With I think it was 75% of people interviewed in a poll recently.
Let's take a look at that number. We have the precise number, right. Yeah.
In favor of the intervention. So, all in all, I think that despite the risks that this mission implies, this is going to, at least in the first part of this mission, is going to be a positive event for Mr. Hollande, who was otherwise facing a nosedive in his popularity, which is very low right now. It's at about 35%, down from was over 50% when he was elected, obviously. And who's also facing strong resistance from on other projects that his government is trying to push through, for example, gay marriage and adoption. So, all in all, I would say it's proven a short-term boost.
Yeah, you mentioned the support of the French population for this military intervention, and you mentioned 75%. That is the correct number. If we can just put that up on screen, the latest poll says 3/4 of people here in France actually approve and back this military intervention. Now, you know what's been interesting here is everybody throughout the political spectrum here in France, left, right, far right, has backed President François Hollande. Let's get some of the reactions, starting with Marine Le Pen, leader of the far right.
I find it legitimate. It doesn't mean we're interfering. It means we're intervening after a moderate government asked us to support it, a government with which we have a defense cooperation deal and that's facing a threat by Islamic fundamentalists.
In these exceptional circumstances, France's main opposition party supports the president's decision to help the Malian government in its fight against terrorism.
The
president's decision was the right one to make. He did the right thing in this climate of emergency and of uncertainty.
Mark, I suppose this is to be expected in a sense. I mean, in the early hours of a military intervention, there is no right, there is no left. Am I right?
I think that, yes, in general, you know, you have a country going in, seeing its military and its armed forces, you know, doing things that look great on TV. It's a typical reaction in most countries, unless there's some other, you know, attenuating circumstance. You know, this is what happens. I think what for Hollande, and right now in the short term, what's important is how it fits into a narrative. And, you know, if there's one sort of perceived character weakness of Hollande, it's that, you know, he's flambé, as they say, that that doesn't have much backbone.
Flambé, that's a soft French yogurt.
Right, exactly. And
spineless.
Exactly. And this happened just sort of at the right, in the right way and at the right time, when, you know, he had a successful labor market negotiation. In fact, you could argue either way for this sort of gay marriage debate, but that was happening the same weekend, and all of a sudden
we were expecting to be debating about gay marriage this week because this was the hot topic here in France. François Hollande trying to push through this law that would give homosexuals the right to exactly the same rights in marriage. And finally, the Mali intervention upended everything, and the entire, there were 500,000 people in the streets just a few days ago, and all of that seems to have been forgotten.
Well, this is obviously the biggest news story, and it occupies the media space, and it has worked in Hollande's favor so far, as Gabriela was saying. It could have been completely different. Imagine that we wouldn't be doing this, that there was also the Somalian, we haven't talked about it, but there was an attempt to rescue a hostage in Somalia. Which failed, exactly. So imagine at the same weekend with gay marriage protests, and a labor negotiation, which was positive but could have been interpreted differently if you wanted to, and a failed Somalia intervention. Hollande might be, looking like Jimmy Carter, and why was this screwed up? So I think that I think we're agreed in the short term. It's working well. We haven't actually had any polls out this week that have been taken after the intervention, but I think we'll see a rise in the polls. And importantly, it's also media perception. The New York Times immediately wrote a piece saying that Hollande is looking decisive, and of course French media is going in that direction too.
Looking decisive. I think that's a key word.
Cyril, on that one?
Yeah, excuse me, Philip. Go ahead.
Yeah, just in a way, just a view from an Anglo-Saxon perspective, it's almost a bit. Not completely, obviously, but post September 11th and the Bush, Bush was going nowhere on a train at the time that that September 11th happened, and then all of a sudden he was coming up on the world stage and he was leading the world back into towards righteousness, and I'm almost expecting Mr. Hollande to come up and say, in French, you're either with us or you're against us.
Let's listen. Mark was saying it's all about looking decisive, or certainly that's what the New York Times, for instance, picked up on. Let's get François Hollande and see how he looked decisive, using the first person I when he described how he made his decision to go into Mali and engage French troops there.
The decision I made last Friday was necessary. If I hadn't, the question wouldn't be anymore when to intervene, because it would be too late.
So François Hollande, not just looking decisive, but actually the savior, it seems, of Mali.
And it is true that at this particular point, the Africans in general and the Malians in particular kind of see him as that savior, and probably more so because of a sense of relief. They've been living under this pending doom that they feel that's coming out of northern Mali, especially the Malians of the south, ever since the rebellion that took place late last year and early this year. But, however, I think that the question that I have is how ephemeral and how chimeric is this? We have a situation where, contrary to, for example, in Libya, President Hollande hasn't been able to define really who are the good guys here, because we're defending a government. It was described earlier as a moderate government. It's basically a failed government. We have a government that was overthrown earlier this year by the military. There was a transitional government set into place,
very shaky transition,
where the foreign minister was actually taken out of office by the military after the transitional government was put in place. It seems that in the short run,
the Prime Minister of Mali was forced to resign just 2 or 3 weeks ago, forced to by the army.
And so, therefore, it's very hard to define whether the government in place actually represents a government that is, A, capable of doing anything in terms of the northern part of the country, and B, capable of governing its own country, and C, capable of putting together a military that can do anything to bolster the French troops. So we're moving into a situation where it's very possible that the popularity that Hollande is benefiting from in Africa could soon turn over into question marks about what the role of the French interventionary forces are. Because why? Because now, as I predicted quite a long time ago, the jihadists have spread out into the desert. They've been chased away. They've been softened up in their bases, but they haven't gone away. Now that they've left the northern cities, to the local populations, the southern population is going to start seeing less of a need on the part of the French to actually do what they're doing, because the perceptions of threat are
There's a thin line between saving a population and occupying a country. Is that what you're saying?
I also think that the real question in terms of French politics is how, I think that Mark made a very good point, is how the narrative is carried out. In other words, will Hollande be able to present this as France as the savior? If so, he has to quickly say what he's saving. Because, and I don't see that he's been able to define that yet. He's saved a country that isn't a country, first of all, and he's declared a general war, sort of like President Bush did, on terrorism.
There are some voices here in France, on the French political landscape, that are against this intervention. They don't have very much weight in French politics. I'm thinking, for instance, of Noël Mamère, who's an elected official here in France for the Green Party. I'd like to listen to what Noël Mamère had to say. He says this intervention smacks of neo-colonialism.
Today we're in a situation where we are acting in a similar manner as we've done over the past 50 years. Since the independence of the 14 African countries that were our colonies, we've intervened 50 times. So the government can't say we're going to give up our old ways and continue with the same old policies.
And this is particularly relevant because François Hollande began his term saying, okay, we're done with a very French word, France-Afrique, which is the meddling of France in African affairs. He says, we're done with that. And now you have somebody on his side of the political spectrum saying, actually, this is a repeat of what we've been doing over the last 50 years in this part of the world.
Well, obviously, I think that the main challenge going forward for Mr. Hollande is to make sure that France doesn't look like the only country that's running to the rescue of Mali or fighting the terrorists in the north, as he's saying. So I think that after the operation has started, now the main challenge is to gather international support, which is what they're trying to do today in Brussels, and trying to have the Europeans move faster, much faster than they have so far, and possibly, but that looks like a big question mark, get more troops, more land troops from other countries, which is not a done deal yet.
You're saying they have to gather
European countries, I mean.
Yeah, you're saying they have to gather international support. In terms of domestic political support, we've been saying for the moment, apart from a few voices here and there, everybody's in favor of the intervention and supports certainly President François Hollande. Is there an end date to that political support? Does it run out after, and if so, after how long?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the initial announcement effect does fade eventually, and the media is very fickle. We'll get bored with this. Yes, exactly. In a couple of weeks or months.
There are troops that start dying.
Exactly. Unless there are other consequences, which could be troops dying. Probably, the risks. I think other people on this panel can speak better to this than me, but the risks aren't huge because there's not a lot of troops going in there at this stage. But who knows what the future of that would be? But also, I think the domestic terrorist threat. The threat of French nationals abroad in Africa and so on and so forth. If those things become problems, they will become political problems.
Hostages right now in Algeria, and that appears to be a direct consequence of the French military intervention in Mali.
So, if we could be sitting here in 3 or 6 months saying, well, this was a massive mistake, and for those reasons.
Philip Stoner, just to remind our viewers, you were Deputy Defense Attaché at the British Embassy here in Paris. I just wonder, you were taking part of the military side of things. Is there a point when you're giving military advice or perhaps planning a military operation when the politics intervenes and you're told, look, we can't do this because of politics?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely it does. But it's certainly knowing the military and the French military as I know them, this would have been planned for months, if not almost years. And I think one has to cast your mind back to what Mr. Sarkozy was doing in Côte d'Ivoire not that long ago, when he was basically, in effect, propping up the new regime, the new leadership of Ouattara, because he knew perfectly well that Ouattara was probably going to be coming into a position of leadership within the ECOWAS, which it is indeed now at the moment. And of course, Côte d'Ivoire is and will become increasingly important as part of this invention moves forward. So the support from Côte d'Ivoire at the moment is incredibly important. And all of that would have been planned months back by the military in preparation for this particular event. What was really unexpected was the recent declaration by the ECOWAS to sort of say, effectively, sort of, give a gift horse to the terrorists to say, look, we can't really get our act together before September. At which point, bearing in mind the rainy season was coming on in March, it was quite clear that something had to be done. And therefore, from the terrorist point of view, that the sooner they got in and tried to take Bamako, the better. And that's really why the French had to act. So that's where the politics overlaid completely the military sort of logic, which was take things steadily and plan and get something done perhaps towards the end of the year.
Let's listen to the former French Foreign Minister Alain Juppé. He was the guest of this same politics show, but on our French network just yesterday. And he seems to be a lot more cautious than some of the other political leaders in France about the risks that are involved in this operation. Let's listen to Alain Juppé.
We threw ourselves into this operation, and now we're facing extremely high risks, and we are alone.
Mark, essentially he seems to be echoing what you're saying. If 3-6 months down the line, we just don't know what's going to happen, and that could upend the whole perception of this.
Well, look, I mean, anyone who is an expert in these matters knows that it's not easy. Just look at Afghanistan, Iraq, even Côte d'Ivoire, wherever, these things are very unpredictable, and it's very difficult to know how to get out of this in a good way. Alain Juppé knows that, and that's what he's saying. When Jean-François Copé is speaking in the National Assembly, giving his full patriotic support, it's because he doesn't know in the same sort of expert detail what the risks are. But anyway, there's no political advantage to be be a naysayer at this stage, right. and that's where it's happened. In terms of France being alone, I mean, I think the only really vocal support is probably going to come from the U.S. I think... And
they said yesterday, the defense secretary said this is not a French war. So we're wondering whether perhaps he's paving the way for increased support from the U.S. military. Mark, I got to stop you right here. We're going to move this on, and we'll be back. Stay tuned. We're back in the second part of our debate, and we'll be looking more at the military side of things, seeing whether France can sustain its military effort in Mali.